Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to cover a very general topic about writing yet again as part of my Ghostwriter Talks About series. This time we're going to talk about the hardships of writing. And I think it's really crucial to be honest about writing because there are a lot of people who approach a new skill or hobby with a lot of passion and then a few weeks or even months into their studies, they might become very discouraged or confused about what is going on. So I really want to touch on some of the hardships of writing that a new writer might face and demystify some of the conversation around writing. Because I do think that there are some people who talk about writing that is both mystifying or confusing and at the same time a bit dismissive and gatekeepy. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes very experienced writers will talk about writing as though it's some kind of, ritual or spiritual experience and stuff. And then sometimes it will be this whole thing where they are talking about it like it's just second nature and it will come to you and you'll just be writing. And the truth is that for a lot of beginner writers, this may not be the case. And certainly some of this advice might be helpful for medium skilled writers or writers who are trying to push themselves or push the envelope of their creativity, but it's not very helpful for extremely new beginners. And certainly some writers can start to struggle with feeling not good enough because perhaps some of these writing approaches or some of the rhetoric surrounding writing may make them question whether they're a good writer or not, which is just ridiculous because oftentimes you are a good writer. You're simply going about it differently, and how you would explain your experience as a writer might look very different from, let's say, Neil Gaiman or somebody else. One of the most fascinating moments of the Netflix Sandman show was the final episode, which was kind of like a little spin-off episode where Sandman rescues his ex-wife. So for those of you who aren't aware, Sandman used to basically have a partnership with, or was in some way, shape, or form married to Calliope, who is a minor goddess, a Greek muse, and she becomes captured by a really creepy writer acted by Derek Jacobi. And basically she's passed on to a struggling but very, we could say marginally gifted writer, Richard Maddock, who is, I think, acted by Arthur Davenport, the guy who does Rory from Doctor Who. Very amazing cast, honestly. Everyone's really lovely in the show. But in this case, I started actually getting a bit hot under the collar because Richard Maddock has, written this big bestseller and everyone's saying it's so inspired. And he's trying to write his next big thing. And basically it just shows him sitting and staring at a white screen with this blinking cursor. The idea being that, when you are stuck, this is what it looks like. And I got really angry because it felt like to me that he was expecting inspiration to just hit him out of nowhere without any previous footwork done. And certainly while there are some organic writers who do operate this way, I think it's very damaging to young writers because they think that's how they should just go about their writing. And honestly, it resulted actually with Maddock being very exploitative and rapey, basically. And he gets his comeuppance, which is incredibly satisfying for a writer who's more of an architect like myself, because at one point I was just screaming at my monitor being like, what did you think? I was just, having a me moment. But anyway, so Richard Maddock had some problems. He had some struggles as a writer. And today I want to talk about those struggles. And I want to also provide some practical solutions that you can start using right now so that you don't feel like you're permanently stuck. And what are some of the big things that you as a writer, especially if you're going into self-publishing, what things will you face and how will you get through it? Okay, so let's begin with a big umbrella term to talk about, because this term is very generalized. It can affect many hobbies and your work as well. And that is the big P word, procrastination. I think procrastination, that is putting things off or saying to yourself, oh, I'm going to do that tomorrow. I think this is a symptom usually of something else that's going on. Okay. So if you're not writing and you should be writing, usually it means there's something else going on. There's something mentally going on in your life. Maybe you're in an emotional state that is not conducive for creativity, or you are struggling as a writer with specific writer-related issues. So I'm going to tackle the writer-related issues because while I might have some ideas about life advice or whatever, we're really here to talk about the writing. So let's get into some of the reasons why you might not be writing as much as you'd like, or maybe you are just struggling with getting words onto the page. So let's take a look at 5 major writing issues that a writer will face, and we will also look at some solutions for each one. So the first one, the biggest one perhaps, is called writer's block. So generally I describe this as being stuck. You can't write at all. You don't know what you're going to write next. Maybe there's an aspect of the story that has confused you, and you're not sure how to continue forward. And this is a very common problem. Everyone talks about it. You can get this problem while writing papers for school as well, by the way. So this doesn't just affect creative writers. It affects professional writers. It can affect student writers. So this is an across-the-board problem that happens to all writers. And really, for me, in my opinion, when it comes to writer's block in a most general sense, my answer is, where did your organization go wrong? So let's look at the solutions. So the general solutions would be to go back to the drawing board, pre-write more, or talk with a friend. Let me explain. Usually, if you don't know what to write next, it's because you didn't plan enough. Usually, okay? So a lot of people might say, oh, you can just start writing and it will come out of you if it's true and if it's passionate. Yes, but sometimes you genuinely get stuck, especially if you're working with more convoluted genres like mystery stories. So honestly, you got to remember that not everyone can just spew out content. You can't just always write stuff. Some organic writers who are very experienced can do this, but generally beginners should always have a plan. You should always be planning. You should always be pre-writing. And pre-writing can involve outlining. But some people are a little confused about outlines, and they provide me with an outline and they're like, look, this is this wonderful outline I made. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's a sketch of an outline, my dear. So before you start writing, or if you are in a situation where you are really stuck with writing, my recommendation is to pre-write more. If you're really, really stuck, you might have to make a major narrative change. So you'll have to go back to the drawing board. And sometimes it's very hard to figure out where the problem actually is. So you should really have one friend who's very well read that you can rely on, that you can go to them and you can say, hey, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm stuck. What do you think? Getting that second perspective on your writing is so very helpful, especially if they're a fellow writer or they have a strong experience as a reader. Those kinds of people will generally steer you fairly well. Okay, so that's number 1, writer's block. Let's tackle number 2, indecision. Now, this is related to writer's block, but it's on a more micro level, not so much macro. So you know what you're supposed to be writing. You have the scene in mind. You have the characters planned out. You know what they're supposed to be saying, but you don't know what to write in terms of your word choice. Every time you write something on the page, you just reread the previous sentence and it's not looking good, right? This is where you may be struggling on a very fundamental level with your actual writing, your technical skill. And in this regard, this is probably the most brutal difficulty to face as a writer, realizing that you might not be good enough for your vision. And it's a real dark night of the soul moment for a writer. Well, your life is not over. Your creative life is not over, but it will require a bit more time to tackle this problem. So number one, what you should be doing is reading more. So you should really have your reading down before you start attempting any specific genre. So if you're going to write mysteries, you need to have read the mysteries that are being targeted to the audience that you want. Let's say you want to write a cozy mystery. You really need to catch up on current cozy mysteries. You need to read classical cozy mysteries, and then you'll be ready to write cozy mysteries. Same thing for any other genre. You really got to read up on it because you will know the words and the specific techniques and approaches to writing that are specific to that genre. So you really need to know that. You really, really need to know that. Another thing, if you're really, stuck in the throes of a paragraph and you don't know what word could fit there, you can always use some kind of writing aid, such as a thesaurus or a dictionary. Always have one bookmarked so you can access it quickly, and go to a thesaurus or a dictionary and consider the words carefully, okay? Just don't choose anything because connotations in English are real, as with every other language. So just use this wisely. Use a thesaurus, something like that. One thing you could do on top of reading more is to actually practice modeling specific scenes or sentences or paragraphs on great literature. So take a scene or a piece of literature from the classics and then copy, but make it your own. So rewrite it, but write it in the style of that great literature. It's a form of modeling. So for example, when you're studying how to draw art, you usually will look at the greats and you will start copying some of the stuff that they do. And then over time, you will learn your own voice. In the same way, writing, you can kind of tackle this by basically looking at great writers and then copying their style, but just change the words up and make it your own. So once again, this is a question where if you are not reading a lot, you probably won't write well at all. And of course, in this day and age with AI, it might be very tempting to go to AI and ask AI to write a sentence or two for you. I highly recommend that you don't do that. I feel like you really should be able to write this on your own. If you are unable to write something on your own, it means it's not time for you to write it. You need to put it down, walk away, and work on something smaller or work on something more focused that will develop your writing techniques. So read more, read analytically, copy and model, and of course rely thoughtfully on specific writing aids. All right. Number 3 is burnout. This is when you're really tired, you're worn out, you're uninspired, and as a result, you can't write. And this can come, like I said, this can come from a place of emotional or psychological exhaustion. I can't talk about that so much, but I can talk about ways to catch fire again if you're really struggling. So one of the things you could do is just get out. So don't go on social media because a lot of times social media becomes a distraction and actually saps our mental energy. So don't go to social media. Instead, go outside, leave your writing area, and mosey around and get a breath of fresh air, like literally get oxygen into your brain, because that can help a lot. If it's a bit more chronic condition, my recommendation is to take breaks from your writing and work on your second hobby. So you should really have 2 hobbies going. So let's say you're a professional who's working in another industry. Let's say you're an accountant or you're a game developer or whatever, and you want to write on the side. So that's your hobby number 1. But you should probably have a second hobby and make it really different, right? So it could be something like listening to music or looking at the stars, or something like a sport, for example, or hitting the gym or something. These kinds of things can really help you tackle something that helps you feel confident once again, so you can go back to your first hobby or your writing, and with a kind of like a fresh perspective. So this is what I do. I have I really have too many hobbies, to be frank. I'm cutting some of them down because, age has a tendency to help you realign your vision on things, right? But yeah, so if I'm thinking about it, I have my ghostwriting and my ESL. That's my actual income, right? And then I'm working on launching my pseudonym brand. But if I'm stuck with writing, I will go to programming and video gaming. So usually I do one of those 2 things as a hobby, nothing serious. It's not intended to be a career per se, just something I want to learn and kind of challenge myself with. And usually when I make a breakthrough in my programming, or when I do particularly good in, let's say, a raid or something that I wasn't good at before, I feel a rush of confidence, and that can usually be a bit of a high that I can ride. I can go back to writing and potentially get through that particular section that was really bringing me down. And when it comes to burnout, sometimes it's because we are not pacing ourselves and we're pushing ourselves too much. This is particularly hard for someone like me. Now, I don't want to self-diagnose as being ADD or something like that, but what I do struggle with is flow. You might think, well, what's wrong with flow? There's nothing wrong with flow. If you can get into flow while you're doing something, it's really great. It's really good. You feel great afterwards. However, there's a difference between flow and obsession, and I can be one of those types that zones in so hard on something. I can go for hours without eating, going to the washroom, and sleeping. And the result is that my life, my bedroom and stuff becomes in danger of cloning Asmongold's room. It's not as bad as Asmongold's, I have a breaking point, but what I mean to say is I can enter a slob mode for real. There's a reason why I'm single, right? It's not very conducive to building a relationship if you're not, taking care of yourself. And why do I get into this mode? Well, because let's say I'm really pushing hard and I'm just feeling it. It's just coming out. I will sometimes work upward of, 10 hours on something because I know I'm on the cusp. And sometimes I achieve that cusp and it feels great. But is it healthy? No. Can it lead to burnout? Yes. Yeah, it can. So sometimes what you need to do is rely on time management solutions. There are a host of them out there, like time chunking, which I think Elon Musk covers. Like Elon Musk relies on time chunking. There's the Pomodoro technique. There's the Eisenhower matrix. There's a whole bunch of ways to tackle work projects and things that you want to complete and accomplish. So once again, if you want to be a healthy writer, it's a good idea to figure out ways to take breaks. I'm going to just pop a link to a channel in my info box down below. This very helpful study video channel that has breaks built into the sessions, the ambient music sessions. I've relied on this before to help me take breaks when I really was in a mode to care for myself. This is what I will do to help me remember to take a break, to drink water, to stretch my legs. Sometimes I do check social media, but generally I have my phone on Do Not Disturb almost all the time. And this is because I'm regulating how much input from the outside world comes into my brain, because I am the type who gets a bit, shall we say, concerned about the world. I can start feeling like the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And this takes away my creative energy, and it can really bring me down. And I had come to realize that I can't fix the world, but I can maybe put out some good things that people can read and enjoy. And maybe that can be good enough. And so in order to maintain that focus, I do have to cut back on my socials during the day. So once again, if you're struggling with burnout, get some time management techniques going, take breaks, work on other projects or hobbies that are equally interesting and challenging to you. And also ask yourself if it's actually burnout or if you just have writer's block. Because there are some people who are like, I'm just so burnt out from writing. And I'm like, okay, how much are you writing every day? Well, I'm writing like 1,500 words a day. And I'm like, Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that you aren't a real writer unless you're writing like 6,000 words a day, right? Everyone has their limits. But if you're writing less than 2K a day and you're air quote getting burned out, chances are there's something else going on. Yeah. Now, once again, I'm not suggesting, like, let's say you're working 10 hours and you come home and you want to do your writing and you're only getting, let's say, 1,500 to 2,000 done a day. That's fine, right? But if you have a normal workflow schedule and you are wanting to get serious about writing, you need to at least put in 2K a day. At least. For real. So think about that. Think about, is it burnout or is it something else? And if it is burnout, figure out ways to kind of reinvigorate yourself, get to the gym, go out for a walk, touch grass, literally. Whatever works for you. You know where your energy comes from. If you don't know where your energy comes from, research that first and then figure it out. I recommend time management techniques and other kinds of techniques to kind of help you keep yourself paced if you're an obsessive type. And if you're not obsessive and you're just feeling tired of writing and you've only written, let's say, a couple thousand words, the response from me would then be your endurance as a writer is still too small to take on a novel. You should be only focusing on paragraphs and short stories. Once again, your endurance will define your capability to write something big. So if you want to write something big, you need to be able to write more. And if you want to self-publish and make it a career, you're going to have to really get used to writing a ton at the beginning, right? There are some rags to riches type stories like J.K. Rowling and stuff where you have these writers who were discovered overnight and suddenly they're making tons and tons of money. But as I already talked about, and I have an idea, this is not the case for most writers. Most writers have to paddle their feet really hard like a duck under the water. You got to just write. Because, 90% of what you write is not going to take. It's going to be shit. And 10% is going to be gold, but will still not be discovered. So you have to understand that endurance and the ability to write a ton is going to be key, particularly toward the beginning of your career as you set up your back catalog. And then eventually you'll be able to slow down, but you will never be able to rest on your laurels. Think of writing as being kind of like streaming, and basically it's the same thing. Okay, the next two, number 4 and number 5, are more related to post writing. Okay, so let's say you get through your writer's block, you get through your indecisive moments, you get through your burnout, you've written your thing. Is your writing fully done? No. There are still 2 more challenges, 2 more hardships that writers have to face. So number 4 is related to revising and editing. And this is where a lot of people can collapse. Okay. So basically revising is when you are revisiting your content and looking at the overall structure. So the overall story, checking for plot holes, checking for character consistency, things like that, narrative, lore consistency, all of that kind of stuff. Editing is more related to the technical side of things, such as your grammar, your sentence structure, your word choices, spelling, vocabulary, punctuation, all of that kind of stuff. Now, most people are okay with editing. Editing is usually not a big deal. There was one time, okay, I'll put a personal story in here so you guys can all laugh at me. There's this one time I wrote this really zany novel, inspired by my friends. And one of my friends who I respect greatly suggested that she proofread it with the hope that one day I would publish it for real. I mean, I could still go back and finish editing it. Yes, but it was a very, yeah. Okay, so in the story, when I was writing it, I was using a specific kind of voice that required some hyphenization. And by the use of hyphens, I mean I used a lot of hyphens. And so when my friend, we'll call her Emmy, when Emmy went through it, she axed a large portion of the hyphens. And this is basic editing, right? But this editing, in my, sensitive writer spirit, being still attached to the original draft, freaked out a little bit. I was like, what? Not the hyphens. So we had a bit of a discussion, shall we say, about the hyphens and what I was attempting to do with the hyphens. Emmy was super gracious. She went back in, she re-looked through things, she reevaluated some of the hyphens. But a chunk of the hyphens had to go. And it was a moment where I had thought I was okay with all forms of editing, but then I realized that when the conventions define the style, this is where editing can become a problem. And you have to have an editor that you can trust. In this case, Emmy was correct. There were too many hyphens. And, when I was going through my first run through of the edit for it, I did end up cutting a chunk of the hyphens because she was right. There were too many. If I were to publish that novel, there would still be a significant amount of hyphens in there because, once again, it's written a certain way. Which might not be to everyone's taste. It's kind of like Terry Pratchett meets Douglas Adams, something like that. So anyway, that's an example where sometimes even if you try to approach your writing with a modicum of professionalism and willingness to hear constructive criticism, it's not always going to be easy. So if editing can be so fraught with confusion or concerns, you can imagine what revising must be like, because revising is when you're taking an axe to the actual ideas and content of your story. And that's where things can get really, really tough for a writer. There are some writers who are incredibly sensitive and who feel one with their writing. And this can be very dangerous if you want to make a living out of it, because if you can't take criticism, then you will not be able to transform yourself as a writer and get better. So let's take a look at how to survive this incredibly hard and difficult period of writing, this phase of writing that can really upset some people. So one thing I suggest is to set your writing aside for a period of time. Depending on how sensitive or how invested you are in your writing, what kind of personality you have been gifted with, you may need up to 6 months away from your draft. Because the reality is that sometimes we achieve a new high with our writing, and it can be hard to hear from someone that it's still not good enough. So for some people, they can start editing and revising like within a week, right? Because they have a low investment in it. It's not necessarily a passion project for them. They just want to make money and they need to get it out. So they'll be very, very brusque about the whole process and they won't care, and it's totally fine for them. But some people might need up to half a year or even more to actually step back from the project and maybe go do other things, continue writing, and then go back and reread with a more objective eye on their own work. So give yourself some time if you need it. Don't try to edit or revise right away. Also, side note here, revise before editing, obviously. Change major portions before you go in and do like the small polishing stuff that editing involves. Okay, number 2, if you want to make things easier for the revision stage, it's probably a good idea to use a basic spell checker or, for example, Grammarly to go through your document. Use these aids carefully because technology can only help you so far. And don't do a change all or auto correct or whatever. Like, go through and just make sure that your document is sort of clean. I will go more into this in detail in another video. Basically, you can use some technological aids to help you get the worst of the mistakes out, because you want a fairly error-free draft when you are revising. But it's not the final editing, of course. Finally, if you're really, really stuck with this phase, after all, revising and editing your own work is incredibly difficult to do. Most writers will eventually outsource editing, and they will usually rely on a beta reader to help them target problem areas in general in the draft. Then they will rely on what we would call substantive editing. So substantive editing is when you're doing heavy revisions, and then later you will need a line editor to basically do the editing or copy editing. So there are different types of editors, and one person who might be doing your proofreading and your line editing may not be the same person who does your substantive or your revision editing. So just keep that in mind. It could get quite costly, but if you already have an income coming in, it might be something that you would want to basically invest in to help you with that particular phase of writing that can be really, really tough. Now, once again, hearing it from someone else isn't always easy. Hearing from a beta reader that this dream book that you came up with doesn't make sense at all is never easy. You need to understand the difference between constructive criticism and just flaming. However, if you have a very professional person working with you, that should not be an issue. And once again, if you know your vision and if you know what you really want, this is always very helpful during the revision stage because it can help you clarify where you are missing out. However, once again, you will have to be ready to take criticism. And if you don't take criticism, you won't grow. You will always just be the same old, making the same old mistakes, and you will get nowhere. So that's number 4, revising and editing. Very, very difficult time, a time of hardship for most writers, but you can survive it with the right approach. And the final one, number 5, is marketing. So basically, when you network and prepare for publishing, you're going to have to do some form of marketing. Usually this will involve reaching out to blogs, getting beta readers on board to review your stuff when it hits Amazon. If you're self-publishing, you might want to get into writer groups on Goodreads and things like that. There's a whole slew of ways to go about marketing your book. For some people, this is incredibly, incredibly hard, particularly if they are introverted or less savvy with social media. So one thing that you can do is take a simple marketing class, or you can listen to self-published writing professionals and figure out the steps that you can take to ensure that your book reaches the market that it needs to reach. Writing a good book description, for example, on Amazon is very crucial in order to target the algorithms. So you need to know some very basic SEO practices in order to hit market. What you can do usually for that is go onto Amazon and do market research. If you are, let's say, writing a fantasy story, go on to Amazon, look at self-published stuff, and see which ones are most popular and look at how they're handling their book descriptions. And usually that will give you a bit of a pointer as to how to handle it. There are other SEO stuff that you can use. And of course, I'm more than willing to do a video step-by-step on how to write a book description on Amazon, which I was actually trained to do as a ghostwriter. So that is one of the services I do provide, is writing book descriptions for Amazon. I'm getting better, if I do say so myself. It's not my favorite thing to do. I find SEO to be incredibly daunting. I am myself a completely noob in marketing. I am not good at marketing. My personality is antithetical to marketing. I am a black hole for marketers. I am the reason why people put product placement in films and games and stuff, because I avoid all forms of marketing and ads. I hate marketing, and I hate self-marketing. You can't just throw your stuff out there and expect people to come. You actually have to think about how you are writing your book description. You have to think about how you're positioning your book. And it's not just about whether your idea is good or bad, or whether your writing is good or bad, because some really terribly written stuff out there is still getting read. So it's usually about marketing, positioning, and how you land on Amazon if you're self-published. So how do you go about this incredibly difficult, hard part of writing? I can only give a couple solutions that I'm myself experimenting with right now. So number one, once again, take a simple marketing class. Listen to self-published writing professionals. Number two, you can actually decide to go the traditional publishing route and seek out a literary agent. This means you will have to learn how to write pitches. This means that you'll have to manage your stuff, manage your queries, manage which literary agents, which literary houses you're going to apply to. Sometimes a literary agency will have let's say, a whole group of literary agents that all seem to kind of fall into the genre that you're looking to write in. So you might have to choose to approach one, and if that fails, you're going to have to approach another one. And if that fails, you will have to go down the line, so to speak. Sometimes you'll want to reach out to multiple literary agencies, and you'll have to keep track of it. I used a spreadsheet when I went for it. And some of these queries will take up to half a year to be responded to. Some really quick, responses were within, I think, a month, but some took over half a year. Yeah. The result, my personal anecdote from this experience, is you have to be prepared for a lot of rejection, even if you think you got something there. Some of the literary agents responded to me and said that my copy was very clean, that they appreciated the quality that was clearly in my draft, but my story wasn't something that they were looking for right now, which basically means that the market trends for certain genres are basically following metas. So if you are trying to be true to your aesthetic, as I talked about, and I've got an idea, be prepared to be rejected a lot. And you may not be able to publish traditionally if you really, really want to tell the story you want to tell. You might just have to go the self-publishing route and cross your fingers. And once again, as I mentioned before, the literary publishing world right now is in a very odd spot, caught between this money-making agenda, but also this kind of woke thing going on. So you got to keep that in mind as well. It's not going to be so simple to just get a literary agent. I think as well you can outsource some of the marketing to like a specific marketing agency. I think for me, that's something you got to be careful about because you could end up swindled and you really need to do your homework before you go down that route. I would personally, as a suggestion, go instead into the writing and reading circles, connect with bloggers who cover the genres that you are hoping to write in. Reach out to bloggers, send free copies to people to read and then review on their website. You might have to pay them a fee. You can also reach out to specific author communities, and sometimes those author communities will have recommendation pages and you can self-recommend or get others to recommend you. So there are ways that you can create a network that you can build an audience on. However, this particular hardship, the marketing thing, is something I've not yet quite got a handle on myself. And on top of that, I think if you have a certain kind of personality, like I said, you're going to be naturally handicapped. It's going to be a bit more difficult for you. And on top of that, you have to just be aware that you're entering a hobby that is highly saturated. The amount of people who are bungee jumping isn't as high as the amount of people who think they have an idea and should write a book. So you are going into a hobby that is highly saturated. And therefore, if you want to make a living out of it, you're going to have to figure out ways to reach the market you want if you believe the market is there. And you're going to have to use multiple platforms in order to communicate with those people. Yeah, so that's about it. That's an ongoing thing for me, marketing. I'll let you know how my journey goes and how, as I'm working towards launching a variety of different products, I will let you know how things are. Easier said than done, shall we say. So let's see how this all goes. And I hope you all also have some luck getting through these hardships. Let me know if any of these solutions worked for you. Let me know which hardship is really plaguing you. You can vent about your writing journey down below. And I hope that maybe you come away feeling a bit encouraged and maybe feeling that you are not alone in this very difficult journey toward sharing your world, sharing your writing. Well, that's it for now. I will see you all around next time. Take care.